Hello, Dr. Pelcovitz. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to wait a couple minutes to get started, but I appreciate you coming early.
My pleasure. Nice to, I don't see you. Nice to hear you.
That's fair enough.
How's everything? Thanks for the stuff you sent.
Yeah. All right, and so we are currently broadcasting live to YouTube. So we wanted to make sure everything was all organized. And so we've just got a couple more minutes before we get started. All right, Dr. Pelcovitz, it is 8 o'clock, and you always naturally have a million important things to do. We really appreciate your time, so we're going to get started. And thank God it's on YouTube. For anyone who jumps in a little bit late, they can always rewind a little bit. And so let's get going, okay? We all set? You can hear me, right?
Excellent. Sure, I can hear you just fine.
All right, so the Chavod, this is very, very exciting for me, both because what more could I want than to be able to spend 2 hours talking? Sorry, not 2 hours. A few minutes, 35, 45 minutes talking with my, I guess you could call it Rebbe in psychology, or not just psychology. Dr. Pelcovitz, we'll sufficiently embarrass you with your more formal bio, but for Wayu Musmachim, Dr. Pelcovitz is always a source of wisdom and inspiration. And if I may, I'm not even going to go through the whole bio because there's too much in there, but there's a lot. Dr. Pelcovitz is the Gwendolyn Joseph Strauss Chair in Jewish Education. He's a professor in Azrieli and in Reeds, and really just general guidance for all of Yeshiva University, a special advisor to the president. He spent over 2 decades at the North Shore University Hospital NYU School of Medicine, clinical professor at NYU. Dr. Pelcovitz has PhD from UPenn, and the list goes on and on. Authored many, many books. Baruch Hashem, it's a real treat for all of us to be able to learn from him. And as if that's not enough, in the time that we all spend doing God knows what, Dr. Pelcovitz is often being flown around or zoomed around the world to help with whatever crisis is going on. And so both, I guess on behalf of Am Yisrael, if I can be so bold, thank you so much for everything you do. And in particular, thank you so much tonight for joining us so we could spend a little time talking about Teshuva.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be able to relate to you in this way, and thank you for all that you do. So thank you. And I far prefer being zoomed around to being flown around. So that's one silver lining to the pandemic.
All right. Well, imagine that you're pretty busy even these days, right?
Yeah, it's interesting with the reentry. In some ways, there's more of demand for mental health input than when things were certain. When you go from the black and white, the all or nothing certainty of where we knew exactly what was expected of us during the pandemic, to what we have now, which is a lot of, we're living in the fog, we're living in the mist, living in the gray with uncertainty. Yeah.
Okay, well, we got together tonight to talk about Teshuva, so let's talk about Teshuva. Uh, uh, before I get into more specific questions, is to approach Teshuva from a psychological perspective, is that logical? Does that make sense? Are we sort of kidding ourselves? Is it just, Dr. Pelcovitz knows a lot of Torah and knows a lot of psychology, and we're trying to shtuck them together? Can you maybe speak to that for a moment?
No, I think to a certain extent it's a logical integration. I mean, of course, I'm biased, but I think that life's about change. It's impossible to go through life without changing. We can conceive of a world where everything stays the same. It would be a disaster. There's even some fascinating research in terms of the biology that says that our eyes are making these invisible eye movements thousands of times in a given day. And that if our eye wasn't constantly flitting back and forth in this invisible way, we would not be able to see. So change is built into the very way we perceive the world. And Shuva, which is, really, what this 40-day period is all about, is an amazing kind of opportunity to be mindful about that process of change, which is part of what it means to be a human being.
Okay, so if we want to change and putting past, we've gotten to the point that we're ready to change. What does healthy change look like?
So again, I mean, there are many different pathways to change, and probably if we look at the past year, we look back to the Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, the Elul Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur period of exactly a year ago. We probably could not have predicted at all what life would have brought our way. But I imagine that everybody's going to have a different story of the change that they were called to make, and a different kind of personal narrative of what it's all about. But there's I think an incredible opportunity during this time of year. Two meanings of the word Elul, of the month that we're in. One is, the meaning of the word Elul means to search. So it says in the Torah, it says Shlach L'cha Anashim, in the story of the spies being sent to Israel. So there, Onkelos in Aramaic translation translates the word of Yasuras Arts, go search out the land. His word is Yalula, meaning that Elul means to search. It's a search process, which is such a healthy thing, I think, for everybody to do in the mindful way that we do it. I think we might be the only religion in the world that has this much focus on that search process. But I heard actually from Rabbi Brand's mother-in-law, is that who I heard it from? I think I heard it from her, that Elul backwards spells is lule, meaning the if onlys. And what she taught me was that aspect of Elul is, how do we handle the mistakes in our lives? How do we look at what happened in the last year that we may have regret for? Did we lose our temper a little too much with the stress of the pandemic? Did we sort of withdraw into solitude instead of connecting and doing chesed? And in those two aspects, I think it's a natural kind of challenge in terms of the psychology of change.
Okay, interesting. And naturally, you're even teaching me uncluses that I didn't know beforehand. Thank you so much. So in terms of pace, we've got a 40-day period. What's a realistic goal? What's a realistic vision to have? We don't have to get into the whole Dvar Torah, but we talk about the difference between the Ben Sora Mora and Yishmael. Ben Sora Mora is sort of Nidon al Shem Sofer, where he's headed, whereas Yishmael is judged by Asher Husham, where he is in the moment. If we're already halfway through Elul, I've got 25 days left. What am I aiming for Yom Kippur? What do I want to be arriving at? Or maybe is setting a goal not really the right way to approach it in the first place?
Yeah, look, I think part of the beauty of this period of years is that it's a time of setting goals. It's interesting. If we as a group now sat down and we wrote what our goals are, meaning where do we want to go, and we really got in touch with where we want to be next year at this time, and we had the internal kind of self-examination to answer the 3 questions that Yaakov prepares his army for. Who am I? Where am I going? What am I going to do with what I have? That would be a good yardstick in terms of what we're looking for. One of my favorite thoughts about the importance of goal setting in the process of Teshuva, in the process of change, is what Michael Josephson, the head of the Center for Ethics in California, said. He said, here's how you have to live your life. He says, imagine yourself as a fly on the wall at your own funeral after you've lived 120 years, a long, productive life. And think as you're being eulogized by whoever's giving your eulogy of the 3 main ways that you want to be remembered at the end of your life. He says, get in touch with the 3 ways you want to be remembered. And then he says, live life backwards. Live life backwards. Keep our eye on the ball. Where are we going? Where are we going short term and long term? But in terms of pace of change, what the psychology research shows, as well as a more careful reading of various Jewish sources, is that it's generally better to have gradual change, change that is part of an internal slow process of development, generally probably is more enduring, and we do better with it. We had a doctoral student who did her doctorate at Azrieli at Yeshiva, and she looked at a large group of Balei Tshuva and compared them to large groups, 250 Balei Tshuva, their children, and then compared them to a group of people who were from birth, observant from birth, to see what are some of the differences between the 2 of them. And she actually found that pretty much the same thing that made for healthy parenting in any group is what made for healthy parenting in both groups. Balance between love and limits, flexibility, really being there for your kids, and being able to give a consistent message in terms of parents. All that stuff is very important. But one of the main findings that she had in her dissertation, she's now an esteemed professor in the city university system, but one of the main findings that she had was that in the group of Balei Tshuva, the more gradual their process of change, the more time they had to gradually pull themselves in, the better they did. And the more enduring the change was.
Okay, I guess it sort of leads us into our next question, although I'll just make one point. Derek Hashem and Ravari Kaplan, in a lot of his NCSY work, would mention this, alludes to that eulogy concept, that living, the best way to live your life is to sort of picture what your life will look like toward the end, to live every day like that. But people didn't come here to hear me; they came here to hear you. So we'll continue.
Great to hear you.
You talk about enduring change versus superficial change, and so I guess we want to make sure that these are real changes. Oftentimes, one of the pitfalls that happens after Rosh Hashanah and that maybe we think about and reflect on in Elul is that set all these goals and maybe I even reached them and I was living this, and then it all fell apart. Alakas Kama Kama, this year, I had all these things going. I was great at Minion, I was great at Dafyomi, I was great at whatever practice I wanted. I never yelled at my kids, who knows? But then COVID hit. How do I, create an enduring change that's not just going to be superficial?
Yeah, so we could stay here for many hours talking about the answer to that question, but I think that one of the sets of research studies that I find very meaningful is the stuff that shows that the key to enduring change has to do with ritualizing it, making a part of the pattern of your day. I'll give you an example. All the research on COVID is showing something that we knew before the pandemic, which is that being able to focus in an optimistic way on what we have instead of on what we don't have, we do better. To the extent that we could build gratitude into our lives, we're going to be able to deal with the stress that the pandemic brings on us in a much more effective way. Hard to do that all the time, but that's the general goal. The very word to be Jewish, Yehudi, comes from the word Hapamodes Hashem. Leah is saying, thank you, God, for the gift of giving me more than my fair share of children according to what I was destined to have. But gratitude is hard. Gratitude, a lot of changes in personality traits. It's hard. The research shows we tend to be most grateful to people who do an unexpected kindness for us. Somebody helps us fix a flat tire when our car breaks down in the middle of the road. Somebody who drops off a package for us and we're immunocompromised and can't do shopping ourselves. Very easy to be grateful to them. The challenge is how am I grateful for the people I owe the most to? Parents, grandparents, children, friends. We tend to habituate to it. And the only way to do that, according to the research, is to answer your question, to ritualize it. So if you are able to bring it into the fabric of the routine of your week, you don't have to do it every day, but having like a count your blessing exercise where you're able to ritualize it every Friday night. Let's say you go around the table and ask everybody sitting around your table, for those of you who are lucky enough to have family around you instead of being on lockdown where you're alone, you go around the table and you ask your kids, give me something that you're grateful for. Tell me 3 things from the week that you're happy about. Tell me 3 ways that you received kindness from others during the week or you were kind to others. When you ritualize it, or you ritualize any kind of change that you want to have and build it into your daily schedule, that it may seem a little concrete, but that's where enduring changes come from. Small, tiny steps built into your routine.
Okay, and now I guess our Friday night dinners will be a little bit more robust. And so I guess on that, we'll I think that sufficiently covered it. So when we talk about family, on Friday night and developing something, a lot of people are home more than they used to be. Not everyone's in the same environment. And what happens if someone wants to change, but they're concerned about a family dynamic? Our family always did this, our family always does that, and any sort of religious change or any sort of personality change might be different. Some families are not as makbid on certain being at davening on time, and some families, from a midos perspective, they're very into making fun of each other, and maybe somebody wants to change that. What do I do if the change that I'm trying to affect in myself is not in line with the rest of my families? How do I make sure I'm not insulting them, and how do I feel comfortable enough changing? Hope you're not getting cold.
You mean when you want somebody else to change and they're not interested in changing, or they like where's the lack of congruence of where's the disconnect?
The disconnect is that I want to be a little different, but that's going to distance me from my family.
Oh, I see. I see. Yeah, and that's such a challenge. One of the most common lectures I'm asked to give in this general area is called "What Happens When Your Child's Not You?" How do we handle it when our children grow up to be different from us? We have a certain level of religious observance, and they flip out and turn into living life in black and white. White shirt, black jacket, and you come from a family where everything's in technicolor, okay? Or the other direction, where people usually are much more concerned about what happens if you have a very strong sense of spirituality and religious observance, and you raise a child in spite of sending them, playing everything right according to what we're told will help, and your child grows up to leave the fold and grows up to not at all follow our religious values. They may intermarry. There's so many other ways that could happen. What happens when your child's not you? So if I just say, one or two brief thoughts on that. Number one, remember nobody has ever argued into changing a deeply held belief. To be understood, first understand, hear them out, listen to them, try to see things through their eyes, and maintain a connection with them in any way that you can. Obviously, you have every right and maybe even a responsibility to tell them how you feel, but you've already, it's an adult, you've already raised them, you've already done your job. And now it's up to them on how to represent your values in the new key of their adult life. Fascinating research by a guy named Bengston, Vernon Bengston, a book called Families and Faith. He and it's directly relevant to your question. He asked a simple question. He followed 4 generations of a large number of families to see what are the best predictors of whether or not your great-grandchild will more or less reflect your religious values, plus minus 1. And it was fascinating. What he found was the best predictor. It wasn't what schools you sent your kids to. It wasn't how strict you were in terms of insisting to them that you have to do this or you have to do that. It wasn't anything like that. It was the level of warmth and connection across the 4 generations, the level of acceptance, the level of love, to the extent that you can maintain the connection and continue to metaphorically hold the hand of your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, that they're most likely to reflect what we raise them to do. Sometimes that won't be successful, but you hold on. One of the things that Dr. Bengston found is it wasn't uncommon for kids to leave. People leave our way of life all the time. But the best predictor as to whether or not over time they eventually come back was the ability to continue to be there. And until then, there are ways of loving. Validation doesn't mean agreement. You can still connect and validate their feelings. Doesn't mean you're agreeing with their lifestyle. It's painful stuff when your child doesn't. One more very practical recommendation, and that's that, reality is, let's say you have an adolescent or a college-age kid who decides no longer to be observant. And let's say you have a bunch of younger kids at home who are being impacted by that. Happens all the time. So the question is, how do I handle it? If my teenage kid who decided to reject my way of life is blasting the television on Shabbat afternoon, or is walking around my house on Shabbat afternoon in shorts and a t-shirt, and totally disrespecting our way of life. There's a simple formula for that. I'm not saying it's easy. The simple formula is to ask the question, who owns the problem? Okay, meaning you can absolutely insist that if they're going to continue to live in your home, or I'm not saying you kick them out easy. I'm talking here, let's say now about a young adult who already could live independently. You want them, you love them, you want to connect with them as much as you can through the non-sacred. But to say they have to, whatever they do in the privacy of their room is their business. But public areas that becomes a family problem. It impacts on the younger kids. It impacts on your sense of what Shabbat should be all about. And what you have to do is help them understand that you're loved and accepted, and we want you to be, we want you to be here. We want you to be here physically, but it has to be in a way that's respectful. And here's a set of rules. If you insist on watching TV or being on your smartphone on Shabbat, you do it in the privacy of your room with headphones on. If you insist on dressing a certain way, do that in your room. But when you're walking around while we're having our Shabbat meal, make sure to come with at least some semblance of dressing with respect. I find, interestingly, that when it's done with logic and calmness and, trying to really hear them out, and you have that kind of set of rules, I would say 90% of the time, parents could work it out. And then you connect in a positive way. What one of the rabbis at YU says, you connect through the non-sacred. You connect through the non-sacred. You go together to a ball game. Remember ball games? And you used to be able to watch the Chicago teams play ball, but you connect there are many ways of connecting. You go on a walk together. There's just so many things to do that have nothing to do with religion. And eventually, most of the time, over time, I'm so delighted to see that the Haitian Lebovo Salbana, when they're playing for keeps and they're ready to get married, or when they have children, very often they come back then. Not guaranteed, sometimes they don't, but I would say much of the time when people follow these guidelines, you have that continuity.
All right, beautiful, very helpful. So I'll remind our audience watching on YouTube that you are allowed to text me, I guess, if you have any questions, but the YouTube chat is also a means of sharing any questions. We'll have a chance for Dr. Pelcovitz questions a little bit later. One that came in that I think is worth exploring, though, is, when we look at the steps of Teshuva, whether it's Rabbeinu Yonah, whether it's the Rambam, there's this idea of, who I was is not who I want to be anymore. And you've taught a lot about positive psychology, and so how do we balance looking back at who I was and who I want to, and in contrast to who I want to be, but still not feel bad about who I am right now? How do I not go into to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur and every time the word hate or sin or die comes up, I feel like, oh, they must be talking to me?
You mean, how do you not get caught up in non-productive guilt and self-blame? Is that what you're saying? Or?
Yes.
Yeah. What I love about the Jewish approach to sin is how different it is to the Christian approach to sin. The Jewish approach to sin is based on the word hate. The word hate means to miss the mark. It has to do with aim, right? Which is a beautiful, beautiful thought, right? So
based on Sefer Shmuel with the soldiers in Shir Binyamin. I love that.
Yeah, isn't that beautiful? It's like that the archers of Shevet Binyamin were excellent marksmen, and lo yachti, the word yachti, the word hate, means they never miss the mark. Now, according to that way of thinking, Teshuva isn't about beating yourself up because you're an evil person. Teshuva is about, okay, you missed the mark, you have a do-over. So that's one thought, is you see it as a do-over, and we have a religion that recognizes that, we often mess up. We have to do our best to use this 40-day period for real constructive and permanent change, but with the recognition that that human beings are frail, and with time things will things may slip back again, but we're only responsible for doing our best. The next thing is the mindset. Anytime our mindset sees it as threat, we're not going to do as well. But if we can see see it as a challenge instead of as a threat, this is a challenge. Let me work towards making myself better a little bit at a time. The gradual kind of change we're talking about. That would be the mindset that you want to go for. It's interesting. There's a beautiful thought that that basically, let me see if I can find this, because it's exactly what we're talking about here in terms of positive psychology. Let me see if I could find. Have you ever seen Rav Kook's Vidui Hamashlim? Let me just quickly call it up on my computer.
Quoting Rav Kook, I feel like Rav Kook wouldn't be so happy with us quoting him about Teshuva. All right, quoting him about Teshuva specifically in Elul. One of the big limudim for Rav Kook is that Teshuva happens all year round, not just right now.
Right, it's right, but look at how he shifts. Why isn't this coming up? I just opened it. Oh, here it is. Okay, let me read to you. I don't know if there's a way to share the screen here, or should we just keep it simple?
Let's keep it simple. You'll just read for us.
So I'm going to read to you his Vidui Hamashlim, which is what he says. He says this, and I don't think from a halakhic standpoint, but it's a beautiful, beautiful way of using positive psychology for dealing with this question. Here's what he says. You know how we say Ashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu, and we beat our chest and all that stuff. Look at what his vidui is. I do this. I give it out to my students, and I literally, when I'm in shul on during this period of time, I say the regular vidui of saying, look, I messed up, but I also do this. Listen to what he says. Ahavnu, we have loved. This is an aleph beis order, just like a Masham Bagana. Bachinu, we've cried. Gamalnu, we've caused things. Dibarnu Yofi, instead of Dibarnu Dofi, he says Dibarnu Yofi. We've also spoken nicely to people to encourage them. Heminu, we believed. Vishtadalnu, we have tried. Zacharnu, we've remembered. Chibaknu, we have hugged. Ta'amnu Sefer, we have tasted the beauty of looking at a Jewish book. Yotzarnu, we have created. Kamahanu is we have valued. Lachamnu avor hatzedek, we have fought for justice. Mitzinu es hatov, very important in a time of negativity, in a time of constant social putting down of people on social media and other sources and in various kinds of meaning. Matzinu es hatov, we found the good. Nisinu, we have tried. Sarnu liros, we have turned to see instead of pretending not to see. Asinu acher tzivisanu, we've done what we were commanded. Perashnu, we have pulled back from areas that we shouldn't have been involved in. Sadaknu lefamim, there are times that we've really done good, not evil. Karanu b'shem, there are times we've turned to you, God, by calling your name. Ratzinu, we have strived. Samachnu, we have been happy. Tamachnu. And I find this to be sort of, it's a change of mindset by saying, does that make sense to you? Sort of like using it. I just, when I give it to students, they say it makes it a better Yom Kippur for them. It makes it a more meaningful time with saying slichos. So
It's beautiful.
I can share with you if anybody's interested in getting a copy of this.
Okay, that's from Rav Cook. Right behind me is the Halichos Shlomo of Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and in the beginning he says he doesn't like when people say Tech Lashana ve'kil loseh. You made the year go out and all of its curses, because he says that it's too negative focused. There were a lot of brachos this past year. Rav Shlomo Zalman would say even this year with all of the klalos, yes, there were a lot, but afal pikein there were a lot of brachos as well. There were a lot of great things, and so that's a beautiful flip, a beautiful way of looking at it.
Yeah, and just to stick with that for a little bit, to the extent that we're able to see some of the values, and I don't want to be in any way discounting of the suffering and the loss and the sadness, but there's been a lot that has gone on during lockdown for the complication of reentry that has personally improved my davening. It has personally allowed me to deepen my relationships with family members because instead of me running around all over the place, I could really enjoy them and get to know them. I may be driving them a little crazy, but they enjoy making fun of me, you know. And there's a real sense of an opportunity for much more inner growth than we had at other times. And I could just share with you one beautiful medrash. I heard this first from Rabbi Dr. David Fox in California, brilliant rabbi and psychologist. And but you've probably heard this, but it's the beautiful medrash of the Bereshis Rabbah. And it's based on what we have to do at a time like this. It goes like this. It says, Hakol b'kivui. Everything, every challenge in life has to be dealt with hope. And it says Yisurim, suffering, like during a pandemic, b'kivui. We have to hope. And then it says Geula, our ultimate redemption is b'kivui. It's with hope. And there's a beautiful imagery that I always have stuck in my head about the meaning of the Hebrew word tikvah. You know what the Hebrew word tikvah means? It means a cord, a rope, meaning that we're never dangling and twisting in the wind in a totally aimless way. There's always our connection in terms of our spiritual connection to God. Okay? There's always our connection to ourselves, our bein adam la'asmo. And more importantly, in terms of what we're doing now, there's the connection to the community. And as long as we have that form of tikvah, it makes all the difference in the world, and it becomes a source of growth and hope,
All right, if I can piggyback in that with my own, but Rabbi Michael Myers, local teacher of many of us, was telling me this past week that he thinks that the language of Kaveh al Hashem, that language of Kaveh, like the language of mikvah, is to gather together. And so I think it fits well with your medrash. And so I promise people could have questions, although naturally I could talk here for hours asking my own. But Gail Dallas is wondering, in your experience with your students, with the people you're working with, what are one or two of the biggest hindrances to change, and how have you sort of helped and guided people to get past those?
Yeah, excellent question. Yeah, so the hindrances to change is that there's a reason why we establish patterns that are not terribly productive, So we sometimes choose to self-soothe, by doing things that aren't good for us, be it drinking or eating too much or things like that. We sometimes get locked in a pattern. We don't even have awareness of what we have to change. So there are different stages of change that the Rambam and Rabbeinu Yonah talk about, and psychologists talk about going from the number one hindrance is you don't even know what you have to change. 90% of people in the United States, according to the Harvard Business Review, believe that they have excellent self-awareness. But when you look at it empirically, only 10% of people have excellent self-awareness. 90% of people don't, but you don't know what you don't know. So the number one block to change is not even knowing what you have to change. That's called pre-contemplation in the main psychological theory of change, the transactional theory of change by Dr. Shasta. And that's pre-contemplation is really the idea that I'm fine. Maybe people are annoyed with me, but I have no reason to change. There's no karata faith. There's no recognition. That's the number one problem. But then, very often, when we do change, there's something called the spiral theory of change that Francesca talks about. Human nature is to mess up afterwards because self-control is a muscle. So I may be amazing at being able to stop smoking cigarettes. One device I don't have, thank God. I probably would not be alive if I did have it. But I would be amazing, basically at being able to rationalize once I do something, why I'm slipping back. But more importantly, self-control is a muscle. So, for example, I may show tremendous self-control in staying away from drinking too much. Okay? But then in times of stress, it could be a very busy time at work. It could be a very frightening time in terms of loss. It could be a very frustrating time in terms of all the challenges that this pandemic has put on us. We sort of lose it. We sort of lose it. There's that's the challenge. So all those things get in the way. I could talk to you again for a very long time on it. Maybe you could share this chapter, it's in the book, Life in the Balance. But I sent you an early chapter of the book, which I think is better because better than what ended up in the book. Not that the book, I think, I co-wrote with my father, and my father's a very wise man. But that's the book on positive psychology and Torah values. But the chapter I sent you from an early version has a lot of stuff that didn't make it into the book that I think could be very practical and might be helpful. It goes into this in much more detail. So, good question.
All right, the original version's better. That's impressive.
I got my bias anyway.
Okay. Well, really, I would obviously recommend all of Dr. Pelcovitz's books. They're all gems. Baruch Hashem, I have a number of them in one of the cabinets up there. And so maybe zooming in on this year. Maybe this is from a psychological perspective. Maybe it's just from a year of being a thoughtful Oved Hashem. But a lot of people aren't going to have no one's having normal shul. Shul is going to be truncated. Shofar blowing is different depending on where you're going. And if somebody wants to connect and they're used to connecting with, not to say the superficial, but the external experiences of Rosh Hashanah, of Yom Kippur, of the haunting melodies, what are ways that we can engage that on our own, independently from all the things that shul's not able to provide for us this year?
Yeah, and again, I see it as an opportunity in this neighborhood, and that may be exactly what you're doing in Chicago. There are multiple minyanim, outside minyanim, and there's every minyan is 2 hours, no chazanas, no, all those kind of modifications, which means what used to be, take up a big chunk of the day in a regular Rosh Hashanah and Kippur is now going to allow much more time at home, which is sad because, we miss that kind of connection as we were talking about before. But what an opportunity. What an opportunity to be able to take a step back and to be able to connect. I learned something very important in a trip to Chicago a number of years ago. Rabbi Matenti put together an amazing program that had parents from the whole spectrum of the Jewish community in Chicago. So it was parents from community schools, parents more to the left wing of the spectrum, to the people in the most yeshivish parts of the community. And he had everybody take out their smartphone, okay, and use a program called Socrative, which would put images on the wall with big projectors and screens all over the room. And there were questions asked. I was one of, I think, about four speakers. And there were questions that were asked about, what do you think the biggest impediment is to spiritual connection? What do you think we need to do to aid in deeper spiritual connection with ourselves and with our children? And I think many people there, especially me, was stunned by the simplicity and beautiful truth of the number one ingredient that the vast majority of people said was necessary for good connection. And it was a single word: stillness. In order to connect, you need stillness, you need quiet. God is in that kol dema medaka, in that still, small, quiet voice. We're told, the Baal Shem Tov said that one of the ways of looking al pidrush at the words we say multiple times every day in Shema, V'avadatem nehera, get rid of the rush in your life. V'avadatem here could be seen as get rid of the rush in your life. Or, as Rabbeinu Bachya said about 1,000 years ago, Hashem yatzileni mipisur hanefesh. God save me from fragmentation of my soul. Stillness is something that we could get this year on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in a way that we've never been able to. Many of us may have heard this. I think Rabbi Matenki told me he actually didn't quite believe it. So, and I think people who go to his shul have heard this. He spoke to the granddaughter of Rav Shamshon Rafal Hirsch, who's still alive and living in Washington Heights. I think she's over 100 years old, and she's evidently told him this is 100% true, that many years ago, might have been about 100 years ago, Rav Shamshon Rafal Hirsch was so upset with some of the superficiality and lack of connection in the shuls of Frankfurt, Germany, that he canceled davening. I think one kol nidre, he said, stay home. Stay home. He might have canceled davening b'tzibur for the whole Yom Kippur. It's amazing that he had the power to do it. Because he said, let's just stay home. He said, it was up to me. I would shut shuls down for I think he said 100 years. Shut it down so that we could rethink everything. Could you imagine that he said this? And they listened. They had to. He ran the town, and the feeling he had is we need to focus on ourselves and our internal development and our spiritual development. And sometimes you need stillness to do that. That's the gift of this Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. One other recommendation: talk to your kids about what you believe in. Talk to them. What I mean by that is, you know something? We all believe in certain parts of tefillah. I don't mean believe in it. We all connect. I know there's certain tefillot I connect to very deeply, and other parts that I have a harder time connecting to. So, you know, there's certain beautiful, beautiful things. I'm just thinking of. I was just thinking this morning when I got the Yechidus, because I'm not able to go to shul yet, you know, because of health reasons. So I'm going to start with this Rosh Hashanah. I'm going to gradually go back to davening outside. But I was thinking this morning, what is it? That beautiful tefillah about, you know, Lo Mihayadim Reshamayim B'Seser Ubagoloi, and it says, and we have to. The Dover Emes B'Lova. We have to speak truth to ourselves. We have to be honest to ourselves. In other words, we have to literally have that sense of internality. And that's a very meaningful tefillah to me, because I'm driven crazy by all the sheker out there in our world now in a way that drives me a little crazy, and it shouldn't. I should be a grown-up about it. But, you know, when I see, you know, certain people just kind of like criticizing others on social media and all that kind of stuff. So I find it very helpful. You want to have a more spiritual Rosh Hashanah without having to be in shul all day or Yom Kippur. Talk to your kids. Talk to your kids about and go around the table. Ask them, what is a tefillah that you connect to spiritually? You can do this with an adolescent. You can do it with a middle school kid. You can even do it with younger kids. You might be surprised. Share with them what tefillah means so much to you. I remember some conversations that I've had with family members that blew me away in terms of what they connect to and what kids tell me. When I give kids, I'll do this usually once a year as part of a course I teach in the psychology of religion at Azrieli Graduate School of NYU. I'll go around and I'll ask everybody, what's the biggest source of spiritual connection for you? What's the biggest source of spiritual alienation? If you were, I got this from Rabbi Dr. Jay Goldmans in New York, who's done a lot of writing and a very wise man, as I said, we asked, if you had to go to a desert island for a year, you're going to be alone for a year on a desert island for whatever reason, and you're only able to take one page of the sitter with you, only one field with you, what would you choose and why? And when I do this in a class of 30, 40 graduate students, either in our doctoral program or our master's program, everybody chooses a different tefillah, or they choose the same tefillah, but never the same reason. We connect to tefillah in a unique way that reflects our souls, our aspirations, but it makes us so much closer when we get a window into the soul of our family members. And it's something that I think you'll be surprised at, especially if you have young adolescents at home or young adults at home, or even just your family. Do you know what your spouse's or your parents' favorite tefillah is? What do they connect to the most? That might bring it alive much more. You know, what are your connectors? What are your aliens? What's your peak spiritual moment? You know, I can go on about this, but I'll control myself.
I'm happy for you to keep going and going. I'll take two things from that. One, I was in your Azrieli class, and I have a very clear recollection of thinking about the tefillah that I most connect to. Can
you share it with us?
Sure. Yedid Nefesh. We say it before, as Shabbos starts, as Shabbos ends. If you look at the text of Yedid Nefesh, it's all about wanting HaKadosh Baruch Hu to reveal himself in this world. It's a love poem in some ways. I can't get enough of it. It helps that the tunes are beyond beautiful.
Yeah. And through music, but also the words and the meaning of that connection. Yeah.
My other takeaway from what you said is that you've traveled all over the world, lectured in God knows how many cities and countries, but the one traveling story we got was right here in Chicago. That clearly stands out the most.
You have very talented leadership in the community from all spectrums of the community, and in spite of the tensions between left and right, there's an overarching mutual respect. So it's an unusual community that way. Lucky.
Baruch Hashem. We look forward to when you retire and you join us here in Chicago.
I have we have some family there, right?
All right, wonderful. Yeah. I think you and Mary Brand are actually related a little bit.
Yeah, we have connections in many different ways, yeah.
I'm also told that you're making a wedding this weekend.
Making a wedding. It'll probably be the happiest day of my life. I have 4 children. 3 are married, and then I have the one who I was sure would be married first, who is now getting married on Labor Day to a wonderful guy in our front yard. There are going to be 50 people at the wedding. We have a tent up here. She's in heaven. We're in heaven. We love the guy she's marrying, and it's amazing. And everybody's so happy for her. She's this very connected person, actually a very respected clinical psychologist in the Cornell and Columbia system.
Oh, so she's the favorite.
Huh?
She's a clinical psychologist. She must be the favorite.
Yes, she's one of 4 favorites. Absolutely. What is it? Yeah, it's we can go on about that. Yeah. But
all right, well,
everybody's favorites. All my kids are favorites. Yeah.
Wonderful. I only asked you until 8:45. And I'm sure that once you get off with this, you'll be talking to someone on the other side of the world, fixing some problem, or maybe just, getting ready, figuring out your speech for the Shabbos Kala. So we're going to say thank you so much for your insights, just for your friendship. And we really appreciate it. Have a wonderful Rosh Hashanah. God willing, this wedding should be the start of many brachos for all of us going forward. Be well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Send my love to everybody. Thank you.
Will do. Thank you so very much. Bye-bye.
Be well.